Welcome, fantastic friends, to the new episode of the Fancast It 4 podcast, the number one Fantastic Four fan casting podcast on the internet.
Presumably.
Even potentially. I am Dan Bettenhausen.
And I'm Jack Mayer.
And we are your hosts as we venture into the what-ifs of Marvel's first family, who will be appearing in Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
With Matt Shakman set to direct the MCU's Fantastic Four film, we still can explore what it would be like if a different director was behind the camera, and who might they cast.
This week, we are excited to have our friend Chris Anthony Lopez joining us. Chris, please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. My name is Chris Anthony Lopez. Oh, geez. I work in radio, so I talk a lot. So fair warning before any of this starts.
Perfect.
I'm a huge dork. I feel like I tell everybody that off rip. I go on dates, and that's the first thing I tell people. I'm like, I'm a huge dork. Be prepared. And Marvel is one of the few things that I'm just an absolute bookworm for.
Well, if you're a dork and you like talking, you're in the right place.
Finally, home.
Chris, we are very excited that you are here.
Yo, you guys, the second I heard of this concept, let's pick a director, cast Fantastic Four, and let's talk about it. That is my type of podcast. Because awesome. I tell people all the time, the Avengers, the first Avengers film in 2012, that opened the floodgates for me, right? With all this stuff, for a lot of people, it was this huge event movie that was a team of superheroes that a lot of people weren't necessarily familiar with. And it became this pop culture juggernaut that, now 10 years later, we are still here. And this entire 10 years, we've fallen in love with all these characters that a lot of folks didn't know existed until that first trailer for Ant-Man dropped. You know what I mean? The Guardian of the Galaxy, all this crazy stuff. Totally. And now the Fantastic Four, boom. We've seen it before, but I feel like this one's going to be different.
Mm-hmm. Fingers crossed. And maybe they'll pick one of our pitches too. They might hear and be inspired. Who knows?
Maybe they'll pick one of the pitches today, because we are very excited for the director we're discussing for this episode. He is an American filmmaker who has directed films across a wide variety of genres for both adults and children. Regarded as an innovator in visual effects, his exploration of state-of-the-art technology includes the early use of computer graphics inserted into live-action footage, the combination of hand-drawn animation, and pioneering of performance capture techniques.
He is a regular collaborator with actor Tom Hanks, and his accolades include nominations for 3 Academy Awards and 2 BAFTA Awards, and 1 Academy Award win for Best Director. This week, we are featuring Robert Zemeckis. Chris and Jack, what else comes to mind for you when you think about Robert Zemeckis?
So, off rip, right? When I think of Robert Zemeckis, I think of characters that are full of life and adventure, right? I know of the films we're going to talk about today, we'll definitely get enough of both of those things. But some films that we won't talk about necessarily, I'm a big fan of the Polar Express. I know a lot of people give it flack because of how scary the characters look, which I totally understand. But to me, that was something that growing up, it felt grand to me. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And you see that across Robert Zemeckis' filmography. And again, we'll talk about 4 examples in a minute, but his ability to bring so much life out of characters, whether it's in super traumatic situations or if they're rabbits. I am very much a fan of how Robert Zemeckis tells stories. And I'm appalled. And I was stunned that by the time y'all got to me, Robert Zemeckis was still around. He's one of the GOATs to me. He's one of the greatest of all time. He's made some of the best movies of all time.
He is one of those directors, I think, for sure, that is a name that you know, and a name that can kind of sell based on a movie being a Robert Zemeckis film. And I feel like he's one of few directors that can still do that. He's a director that works across a super wide variety of genre. He can make movies that are really geared towards adults, like dark dramas, recently and then just turn around and make Pinocchio. And regardless of whether his movies are critically well received or not, they always feel like there is something special to them that he brings to it. Typically from a technological side, I think about like The Walk, especially in the way that used 3D so well. But then, something like Welcome to Marwen that combined a stop motion that he had been experimenting with ImageWorks and the live action and using that to create a drama rather than something that was for kids. I just think that he is a really, really interesting filmmaker, but obviously a lot of his most iconic stuff comes from the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, you touched on what I was going to say. I feel like he is a director who really hit his stride earlier, and lately, while he's made some very visually impressive films and even some acclaimed films, I don't feel like his spark is as big as it was back in the 80s and 90s, which is a shame. Like, I do think some of the movies he made are maybe overshoot what he was going for, like The Walk. I think The Walk is stunning to look at, but it felt like it was lacking some heart to me. Mm-hmm. Or to be fair, I've never seen Welcome to Marwen, but it looked kind of silly just from the trailers. I don't know if you all seen it. I haven't heard great things about Pinocchio. So I feel like he is a director who can get heart out of a movies and still make them look good, but there's just seems to be something lacking in his recent slate of films compared to that stellar run. There was no stinker between the 80s and early 2000s. Like, it was crazy how high a quality those films were, and it hasn't matched that as of late.
I would probably agree with that. The more recent Zemeckis fare has not been as strong as those 80s and 90s. But again, I feel like there is still a mark that he puts on those films. And for better or worse, I feel like I'm still going to watch them. Like Allied, for example, a movie that I would never have expected to be a Robert Zemeckis film, but one that still felt like a Robert Zemeckis film.
Or Flight. That is the outlier in this later run of films. A stellar movie, a stellar performance he got out of Denzel Washington, stellar performance he got out of John Goodman. Like, a lot of really good in that movie, but that again felt more like an outlier among the later crop of films compared to his prime.
First of all, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that's being said right now. Like, his run in the towards the beginning of his career, going into the early aughts, was nuts. His filmography between, like, my God, I don't even know how far do you want to go back? 84 with Romancing the Stone, all the way to what? Yeah. To me, Polar Express, but to a lot of people, ends at Castaway. But like, there's still so many movies that he's done, and I know, like what Jack said earlier, he sells movies based on his name alone. It's the guy that did Back to the Future. It's the guy that made Castaway. And whether we like Pinocchio or not, that's something, like what you said, Dan, it's visually stunning what he can do. And the fact that he can bring this boy to life, literally, but it may not be the best product, and he may have only been able to get this movie made because he's Bobby Z. But I'll be damned if I let anyone slander Robert Zemeckis' name in front of me.
Exactly. Well, if we're not here for any Zemeckis slander, then let's get into our first segment, which is 4 fantastic films. Here's where we're going to discuss 4 great films directed by Robert Zemeckis, and we are going to start with what I would say is probably his most iconic film. I don't know if there'd be any.
I think there are arguments. I think there are some arguments with some one or two that we might discuss here, but it would be a difficult argument.
In terms of pure iconography, though, and cultural significance, I feel like no other movie defines Robert Zemeckis better than 1985's Back to the Future.
Chris, this is the one you picked, you wanted to talk about. I figure any 3 of us would have picked it if you hadn't, being the guest. So why don't you kick it off? What about Back to the Future is your jam?
First off, I have the poster hung up in my bedroom, so I look at it literally every day. And I was talking about this movie yesterday, to be frank, because it's a perfect film. Casting, direction, story, script, score, visuals, the adventure aspect that I mentioned earlier. This movie has it all. And yes, is it a little weird with Marty and his mom? Yeah, sure. But that's the point. it's weird, and Marty acknowledges that in the movie that it's weird. So like let's not even bring that up again. But literally, this film is the encapsulation of my love for Robert Zemeckis and his movies. I remember watching it for the first time, and I was late to the Back to the Future party. I was around the same age as Marty McFly. And so my parents, they sat me down and we watched the first Back to the Future. And I was like 13, 14 years old, maybe even 15. I was just sitting there like, this is insane. No movie, like there are little film, like there's a short list of films that make me feel a visceral reaction where I'm like, this is a great movie. And I want everything about this and then some. And then we got done, and my parents like, "Oh, Chris, it's late. We're gonna go to sleep." And I said, "I'm not. I'm watching the second one right now." And I fell asleep on the couch the next morning. No brushing my teeth. I'm watching Back to the Future 3. All three of those films to me are borderline flawless. And I know some folks may say they diminish as they go. Nope, not in my eyes. But the first film is where the magic happens, and that it was lightning in the bottle. And of course, you have Michael J. Fox leading the charge. And then Christopher Lloyd's performance as Doc Brown, that comes off the screen. He is just having a ball. And I want to hear you guys' thoughts on Back to the Future. So please stop me before I just keep word vomiting all over the place.
So I can tell my story about the first time that I watched Back to the Future. Spoiler alert, I'm probably a little bit younger than you guys. I'm 21. I watched these movies when I was about 8, I think. And I distinctly remember watching them. Like you, Chris, I watched Back to the Future Part 2, Back to the Future Part 3, all over the course of 3 nights. I watched them with my brother when we were on vacation on Nickelodeon. I remember it so distinctly. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that it was Back to the Future. I remembered everything about the experience of watching, particularly that first one, and just the sensation that I felt and how completely captivated I was by the story. It is really an incredible film that should not work as well as it does, but it really, really works. Time travel is always messy, and sure, it's messy in Back to the Future, but I think the thing that makes you know that it's working is that you don't care how messy it is because you're so invested in the story and the characters that Zemeckis has created, and you're so intrigued by the fact that he set up all of these little things that happen in present day that are then paid off in the past. It's such a nice inversion of planting and payoff because it's really payoff and planting if you think about it. So I love Back to the Future. I have a soft spot for the sequels as well, particularly the second one, because that was my brother's favorite. And we watched especially like the first half in 2015 so often after we finished the trilogy. But I really do love Back to the Future as well. It's an amazing film. It's a great franchise. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have much more to add than that. I mean, you touched on a lot of what makes it great. I think really the only thing I want to say is the DeLorean is arguably one of, if not the most iconic vehicle in Hollywood history. It's up there with the Bond's Aston Martin or the Batmobile, among many others. And just the look, the visuals of that revving up and going through time. Oh, you did this to a DeLorean? Like, it's iconic.
I will never forget the shot of the lightning striking the clock tower as the car drives back to the future.
Right.
Like,
yes.
It is an image that has been burned into my brain for 13 years.
This movie, it's a pop culture touchstone. It's a cultural touchstone. And I love the idea of Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, them saying, we will never do another one. And this will never be done again. And I hope to God that that's the case. Like, I don't know who I have to beg. Like, don't touch these. I know, yeah, there's an animated show, whatever.
And there's a musical that's coming to Broadway.
And there's a musical coming out.
So excited to see.
Also, Christopher Lloyd tweeted out something. He said, I can't say yet, but the future holds something very special for you. Stay tuned.
Okay. Now, as long as that's not Back to the Future 4, I'll be in love
Who
with whatever it
knows?
is.
We'll see.
And Christopher Lloyd can sit here and be like, "We're making another one. Robert Zemeckis is going to direct it. It's coming out in 2025." I will sit and weep and joy, and I'll be the first person in line. It's like my feelings for Indiana Jones.
Exactly.
Right? I don't want to see old man Harrison Ford running around, but I'll be damned if I'm not first in line to go
It's
see
like,
it.
do I want to see it? No. Will I see it? Absolutely.
Hell
For
yes,
sure.
I will. Yes. And I know and they've done other Back to the Future things since part 3. Geez, there's Rick and Morty. Without Back to the Future, Rick and Morty doesn't exist.
Right.
Exactly.
So like it's a whole, when I say cultural touchstone, there will be nothing like Back to the Future. And I know like Star Wars came before it and all this other crazy stuff. Yeah, it's all great, but there's nothing like Back to the Future. Nothing.
It has a lot of ripples that have gone through pop culture history. I think it's best we move on to our next film. This one, we kind of touched on the style. This is a film that came out in 1988, and it was the film that highlighted Zemeckis using and combining animation in a live action world. And that film is Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Jack, this was your choice, so I will let you start.
God, I love this movie so much. This, I think, is probably a perfect movie. Like in the way you say Back to the Future is a perfect movie, I say Roger Rabbit is a perfect movie. I feel like I could throw this movie on at any point, any day, no matter what I'm feeling, and walk away with a smile on my face. It is so good because it gets better with every watch, and it gets better the older that I get. Again, I saw this movie when I was probably 10 or 11. Again, my parents showed it to me, and I didn't put together that it was the guy who made Back to the Future until probably my second or third viewing, which I think probably occurred a month after I had seen it for the first time, because I just wanted to rewatch it over and over again. It is a movie that appeals to kids and adults for incredibly different reasons, but I think that they get similar enjoyment out of it, if that makes any sense. I think the characters are phenomenal. This is an amazing performance from Bob Hoskins. The amount of control that Zemeckis has as a director to 99.9% seamlessly combine hand-drawn animation with live action is something that nobody, I think, has ever attempted in the same way since. Like there are certainly movies and TV shows that have combined hand-drawn animation or 3D animation with a live action setting, but none that feel quite as real as Roger Rabbit. It feels like the world is completely lived in. It feels like this is the way that the world actually is, and that's such an impressive feat. The jokes hit so hard. Again, as a kid, you're laughing at the funny cartoon stuff, but as I'm older, I'm laughing at the line that's like, "What do you mean, where's my car? We got the best public transportation system in the world." As somebody who lives in Los Angeles, that is the funniest line in the movie to me. The mystery is legitimately compelling. And you see the seeds planted with multiple viewings. Like they never try to fool you into thinking the villain is someone other than Judge Doom, and they shouldn't, and because it's a brilliant reveal. The reason why Eddie Valiant hates Toons is so funny, but also so sad. A Toon kills his brother by dropping a piano on his head. How do you come up with that? It's so dark, but also amazing. And the last thing that I'll touch on before I get into my own long-winded rant is just there's one scene in this movie where we learn everything that we need to know about Eddie and his brother's relationship. And it's all done through score and visuals. And that's all Robert Zemeckis. working with every element of filmmaking that he has. And like, we touch on the technical elements with combining hand-drawn and live action. And yes, that's impressive. It is equally as impressive when a director is able to communicate so much about a protagonist through your visuals, everything there, like completely practically done. This, like, the production design that has to go into it. It is a flawless, amazing movie that I will probably watch when we're done with this podcast, because I'm talking about it makes me realize again how much I love it.
Yeah, I've watched this movie before recording today for the first time in maybe 25 years. So Jack has not been alive.
I had not been born yet.
Since the last time I watched this movie. This movie is just fun incarnate. The winks and nods, the irreverency, the parody, the satire, all of it is prevalent through this film, and it all works. Speaking of a scene where something drops on the head, the funniest yet darkest scene to me is when they first come to the crime scene where the first murder happens, and you just see this safe busted through the concrete floor, and then the rest of the body outline is there, but not the head. So like, you as a viewer just get this mental image of this gnarly scene, but it is still played for such physical comedy in the moment, in the crime scene. Like, I was sitting here laughing my ass off. Like, it was just so good. And that is the movie. It is taking this dark film noir and boosting it with tunes. And just because there wasn't as much nostalgia, I don't know if I have the love for it like I imagine Jack and Chris do, but it was a good time. I imagine the more I watch it, to Jack's point, the more I'm gonna like it. But it was really a masterclass in combining all different kinds of comedy between slapstick, satire, parody, kind of dark humor, all into this animated live action hybrid.
I told Dan about like a week ago that I chose Back to the Future just to ensure that we talked about Back to the Future. But my second choice would have been Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because this movie is absolutely insane in all the best ways a movie can be. Bob Hoskins is giving a performance that little to no actors now can do. And shout out to Charles Fleischer, the voice of Roger Rabbit, for, again, Robert Zemeckis movies, talking about like bringing so much life and character into its leads. Roger is so, he's just like, I don't even know how to describe him. He's so just the antithesis of other famed rabbits that we've seen in animation prior. Like, he's a nice combo of Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny, but played for just laugh after laugh after laugh at his expense. And I love Christopher Lloyd in this movie. The behind the scenes of this film is mind-boggling, and how they did this. You have Bob Hoskins acting against like a broom, literally, as a stand-in for Roger Rabbit, and it's stunning. I love the world that this movie takes place in. The whole aspect of, oh yeah, let's have this 2D animation movie, and it's about a cute little rabbit, but he's framed for murder, multiple murders. And I told myself for the longest time, why did I watch this as a child? And when I did I really comprehend what was happening? Because when I rewatched it recently, I thought to myself, did I really like this as a kid, or did I just think the rabbit was cool to look at? And that the baby has a deep voice and it's really just like smoking cigars and stuff. Like, did I just think it was funny? Because there are a lot of dark themes in this that work for the story that it's telling. And the cartoon murders are disturbing, and they're sick at points. And I'm sitting here like, I'm so glad I appreciate this movie as an adult, because as Jack mentioned earlier, it almost gets better with age. This movie ages pretty damn well. And
both from a story perspective and a technological perspective.
yes, 1000%. I feel like even now in 2022, you can pop this movie in a movie theater, and I think it's did it pretty well. Like I know we're so spoiled now with visual effects, but I have such a soft spot for 2D animation on film, especially when it's like a live action hybrid like this, and everyone's bringing it. Everyone is bringing it across the board. I'm like, this movie rocks, and no one can tell me otherwise.
So two final things I want to say before moving on to our next film. One, you can't overlook Kathleen Turner's portrayal as Jessica Rabbit. Probably the sexual awakening for a lot of little boys and girls when they first watched this movie. I mean, just another iconic character that comes from this.
Yep.
And secondly, one thing that I think is super amazing about this film is how they got both the Warner Brothers and the Disney characters rights for this film. Like, you have a scene where Donald Duck and Daffy Duck are in a piano bar duel, like, and then you have a scene where Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny are falling through the sky with Bob Hoskins teasing him about not having a parachute. And among all the other, like, either original or Disney or Warner Brothers cartoons that show up throughout this, I think that just is another touch that really makes this movie special.
Also, one of the most frightening images to a child, the reveal of Judge Doom and his eyes.
Oh, yeah.
Scarring.
Totally.
This movie's scary for kids. This movie's not for kids.
It's not for kids, but what's great about it is that, like, kids can watch it and get that, like, enjoyment out of it. If, like, oh, the rabbit's funny. Oh, they're playing patty cake. But you don't understand what patty cake means as a child.
This movie, if I guarantee my mother did not let me watch this as a child. I went out of my way to watch this movie, and I mean, I love it, and I still do. But Dan, I'm so glad you mentioned the Warner Brother Disney stuff, because that is very, very important, because it's the only, if not one of the only times that instances happened where we have Warner Brothers and Disney characters, but Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny sharing the screen for, and if you count it, the same amount of time.
Same amount of time.
Yeah.
Because we weren't about to let one have more than the other.
Right.
The same amount of time. It's film history.
Right.
And it's, again, cultural touchstone. That's a theme here on this podcast. And it's all Robert Zemeckis. This dude has such a killer filmography. And it's all just, it's nuts. It's all film history.
Well, let's jump ahead 6 years to another film, the film that won him Best Director, and that is 1994's Forrest Gump. This one I felt just kind of necessary to talk about. This was kind of the fourth movie. The last movie we're going to talk about was my pick, but this one just felt kind of necessary to talk about. I will admit, I love this movie. I feel like it, in a lot of ways, it hasn't aged as well as you would hope, but there's certainly some issues, but I think the core of this movie is a lot of heart. It does have this spanning adventure over time about Forrest's life, and all we talk about these last two films being cultural icons, like how Forrest was a human ripple effect in history. And granted, this is historical fiction, but just all the different things in history that you see Forrest go through, from walking with braces that affect Elvis to being the one who helps with Watergate, to like the war, like Vietnam War, and all this stuff. It is not a movie. It is not a movie that Tom Hanks would have started today, but I don't ever for 1 second, I don't ever think he is trying to play it up for awards or to be, this big acting performance. I do think he takes the material with respect. I think he plays Forrest with respect. And that's why this movie, I think, is effective, why there are so many quotable lines from it, why there's a Bubba Gump's Shrimp Restaurant based on
a chain of them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there are so many characters that just stand out in here that this movie, and him running cross country and creating the shit happens logo.
I really can't think of another like drama like this that has had such a cultural impact. Full disclosure, I don't really love this movie.
Fair enough.
I think I would have liked it more had I seen it at a younger age, but I didn't. I saw it maybe like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And I think the other thing about it is the fact that it won Best Picture kind of hurts it in retrospect, because 1994 was such a strong year for movies. And there are several movies that came out that same year that were nominated for Best Picture that a lot of people would argue are better than Forrest Gump. There's one movie in that crop that I would argue is not better than Forrest Gump, and that's probably a hot take, but we won't talk about that right now.
Oh no, I'm curious now.
I think Pulp Fiction's not a good movie, but
I'm not the biggest Pulp Fiction fan either, actually. No disrespect for anyone who does. It's just, it's not. As mentioned in the Quentin Tarantino episode, not the biggest Quentin Tarantino fan in general.
Same here.
I mean, I think with like Shawshank Redemption's the one that really stands out, just as far as it's on TV all the freaking time.
That's how I watched it for the first time. It was on TV.
It was what, TNT or TBS or something, you know.
That's one of my, this is completely off topic, that's one of my favorite jokes from SNL, was even the theatrical release of the Shawshank Redemption had a TNT logo in the corner.
The idea of a movie like Forrest Gump, right? Like, Dan, you nailed it on the head. This movie, if we were just copy paste it from 94 to 2022, that's not happening. Probably up until recently, it wouldn't have happened. But for a long time, a movie like this would have been made. As we have it, it's just very, very good, in my opinion. I really enjoy this movie. I don't know if I say I love it. I rewatched it about a year ago for a podcast that I did. And it was the first time I had seen it just like out of school. Because this is one of those like, oh, hey, we're not going to teach today, so here's Forrest Gump. Because I guess it has history in it. So it was it was one of those cases where I'd seen this flick a few times, and Tom Hanks, as we have talked about for a minute, and as we will talk about momentarily, the Zemeckis Tom Hanks duo is just nuts. And maybe it's also just a testament to how great of a director Bobby Z is and how great of an actor Tom Hanks is. But I love him in this movie. This movie breaks my heart in many facets. But it's also very fun at points in between all the downer beats that it has in between, and how Jenny is one of the most despicable and hateable characters in movie history. But I shouldn't say despicable, hateable characters in movie history. I can't stand her. Because how she did my man Forrest, that's not cool. But Sally Field in this movie, just to pinpoint her for a second, she steals the entire film for me. And I know I just got to gushing over Tom Hanks, but Sally Field, as someone who has not seen too much of Sally's filmography, this is one of the few films I have seen, and I am incredibly moved by the maternal presence that she has over this film. I love my mom, but I also love Sally Field as Forrest's mom. Like, she's so good, and it makes me sad just thinking about it. Just watching this really like tragic character in a way, and having to watch her son go through all of this. It's such a bummer, but the movie's very good, and the score is very good.
I do think it is kind of funny, though, that just a few years earlier, she played his love interest in the movie Punchline. So always just, Hollywood's going to Hollywood sometime.
Sheesh.
That's a yikes.
I'm glad you brought up Jenny. I very much understand and appreciate the dislike for Jenny. But I think she's such a sympathetic character that just gets lost in it all, and I'm always on the fence about, because it's presumably HIV/AIDS that kills her in the end. And there's part of me, it's like, okay, maybe it's good because it is a little more family-oriented drama. Like, I feel like people can watch this with their families. So to be so explicit, maybe not the best, but sometimes you just, with how much they've shown, there's like nudity, there's graphic violence, to not outright say this too always kind of bugged me. But in the end, I do really love the relationship that Forrest develops with Haley Joel Osment as his son. So I think in the end, while there is tragedy, it does end on a sweet note.
My dislike of Jenny is overpowered by my love of Robin Wright. So, but I would probably argue that Forrest Gump, despite being a great Tom Hanks performance, is not his best performance. I would say that comes in our fourth film, which is one that Dan picked, Castaway.
I love this movie. Again, wouldn't say it's a perfect movie, but there is so much going on here. I feel like this movie is greater than the sum of its massive parts. It is a long movie. It is a very deliberate movie. You are on a desert island for a long time in this movie. And to me, going on a little tangent here, as much as I love Gladiator, as much as I love Russell Crowe in Gladiator, I feel like what Tom Hanks did in this movie is way more impressive than something like a Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant. The amount of physical work that went into this movie and how emotional you got of just him on an island trying to survive was a masterclass. And to me, he was the one deserving of Best Actor that year. The movie is him. He is the movie. The movie starts off great. You get this nice kind of snapshot of the relationship he has with Helen Hunt's character. And then, boom, that plane crash scene has you on the edge of your seat the entire time. Him trying to make it back to the island is riveting. Him cutting his feet on the coral. I have created fire. Like, that just punches you in the gut in the best way. And I'd be remiss to say the best character might actually be a volleyball. Wilson, the relationship that Jack is showing us a Wilson volleyball on camera right now.
Wilson the volleyball.
The relationship that Tom Hanks is able to make you feel for him and a volleyball, it's crazy. It is insane. And in the end, when they finally make the raft and they're floating away, and Wilson gets off it, Wilson, I'm sorry, Wilson. Like, I am a wreck thinking about it. I looked up the accolades for Castaway beforehand. Among Best Action Sequence at the 2001 MTV Movie Awards for the plane crash scene, Best Kiss in a Movie for the Kiss in the Rain with Helen Hunt. It also won the 2001 Critics' Choice Award for Best Inanimate Object for Wilson. Didn't know that was an award, but very deserving. Wilson deserved that. I'm very
glad that award exists.
That was that was great.
It was a hell of a performance by the volleyball. I think this movie, you touched on a lot of it, Dan, but it's a movie that rides on the performance of Tom Hanks. If Tom Hanks doesn't work in this movie, then the entire movie doesn't work. And I weirdly think that if it had been any other actor, if it had been somebody who hadn't already won 2 Academy Awards, then it would have been a Best Actor.
Totally fair.
Easy.
Totally fair.
That doesn't mean that I think that because of that, Tom Hanks didn't deserve to win, because he did. It's a brilliant performance. And the fact that it lost to Russell Crowe is a sham. But awards don't mean anything.
Yeah, it's all right. Tom's fine.
Tom's doing great. He's doing fine.
He's playing the Colonel and Elvis. He is Geppetto, and he's got Geppetto money now. He's fine.
Right. He went to go get that Disney bag, and he got it. All right. With our boy that we're talking about. The reason that I had avoided this movie for a long time was because I didn't know what to expect from it. Plus, I always heard of it's Tom Hanks in the volleyball for 2 hours. And that's a lie. It's Tom Hanks in the volleyball for 2.5 hours, guys. Come on. But the thing that I very, very much appreciated from this movie, not only were the scenes on the island itself that just Tom Hanks just scrapping and cutting his hands and throwing volleyballs around. And really, this movie is him talking to himself and a bunch of Nat sound and maybe a bunch of Foley too. I watched it for the first time for this, and my God, am I glad I did. No one told me this was a love story. Come on. I would watch this way sooner if I knew. Helen Hunt and Tom Hanks ripped my heart out of my body. I was laying on my bed and I was watching this film, and yes, the plane crash scene is nuts. It's absolutely crazy. And just Tom perusing the island is great, but nothing messed me up more when Kelly's, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, Kelly's new husband, he's like, hey, she needs more time. I'm the guy that did your root canal a few years ago. Yeah, whatever. And then Chuck looks out the window and there she is. she couldn't face him, because she was all this visceral emotion. And me, I'm like, oh God, because I knew it was coming. And he goes to the house, and the entire piece is nuts. And him telling her that he has to go home, I was just like, sobbing because it's so good. Tom Hanks is so good in this movie, and so is Helen Hunt.
And her giving him the car, it's like, hey, this was your car, was a sweet little capper. And then after that bit, him still having that package that he had the whole time on the island, going to that house out in the middle of nowhere to return it, and then after he leaves, turning back around. I think just it was maybe not a perfect movie. It was a perfect ending to me.
Yes, facts. I couldn't agree more. No one told me this was a love story. I was so upset when I found out that this is about this man. All he's trying to do is go back to his soon-to-be fiance, and we don't get it. The 4-year time jump rocked my world. And seeing the physical transformation of Tom Hanks.
It's crazy.
Oh my God.
It's so crazy.
He looks sick. He looks like a sick man.
He looks like he'd been on an island for 4 years.
Right.
Yes. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is insane what Tom Hanks is doing here. And again, I always thought for the longest time, that Bobby Z and Tommy H, they, which is my new nickname for him, by the way. I thought, like, Forrest Gump, you can't get any better than that. And I watched Castaway. I'm like, well, that's a lie, because you can't. Castaway is so good. And yeah, it's a lot of walking around, a lot of tree cutting, a lot of water splashing, but it all builds to the end of the film. It's all build to when he gets back. And for the longest time, we didn't know if he would get back. And the whole Wilson, oh my God, so good.
We could keep talking about Zemeckis all day. Feels like we kind of have. But
I talk about the Polar Express, right?
So next, the sequel to the Zemeckis episode.
We do it again. Okay.
But I think it is time we get into our fantastic castings. Here, each of us will cast a Mr. Fantastic, an Invisible Woman, a Human Torch, The Thing, and Doctor Doom with an actor or actress Robert Zemeckis has worked with previously and who has not had a major role in the MCU. Chris, as our guest, I'm going to turn it over to you with your cast for a Robert Zemeckis Fantastic Four film.
So I mulled over this because I'll be candid, I wanted to cheat. I very much wanted to cheat. And I wanted to pluck actors from certain years and put them in my movie. But I didn't do that, especially for the sake of my pitch. I couldn't do that. So I switched things up, and I'll start with my Reed Richards. To me, Dan told me he's been on the pod before, but he fits so well. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, off rip. I mean, come on. Who doesn't love them some JGL? And we've seen him team up with Bobby Z on The Walk. The acting chops of Joseph Gordon-Levitt to me. I need a guy who's rooted in reality, but can also be a little jokester from time to time. And to me, that's Joseph Gordon-Levitt, off rip. And he's a guy that can lead the team, can lead a film, and who has the acting chops to fit within a Marvel project while also just bringing some heat too. I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt more than most. I want him as a superhero very, very bad. And Reed Richards just makes sense to me. And we can gray him up a little bit. That's cool. Like I'm more than down with JGL as Reed Richards. So Sue Storm. I always told myself that if Marvel were to do a Fantastic Four, which now they are, I want them to break the mold of what the Fantastic Four are. I just don't want 4 white people doing their thing. And I want them to switch things up. And I will credit Josh Trank's Fan Four Stick in switching up that model. I'm not doing that here yet. Lizzie Kaplan's my Sue Storm. Lizzie Kaplan, who worked with Robert Zemeckis on Allied. Again, funny enough, I watched Hot Tub Time Machine for the first time recently. And again, it has nothing to do with Robert Zemeckis. And I'm not going to talk about that movie because that movie is fine at best. But she pops up in there. I'm like, who is that? I'm like, do I know who that person is? And lo and behold, it's Lizzie Kaplan. I'm like, I don't think I've seen too much of her work. Upon doing some research on her, I'm like, I like her a lot for my Sue. And again, someone who can play a little bit of comedy, because if you're going to be in a Marvel flick, I feel like nowadays you got to be funny. You got to bring the yucks. But again, I also need somebody who's just a really good actor. And Lizzie Kaplan, I believe her resume speaks for itself, and she's no stranger to somebody who already will be the villain of my film, which I'll get to momentarily. But Lizzie Kaplan, Sue Storm. Johnny Storm, her brother. This one's the one I'm most excited about, if I'm being honest. Because Johnny Storm as a character, it's someone who's hot, pun intended. Like, it's this showboat, this stud of a man. He commands attention. And we've seen that before in prior Fantastic Four iterations. But in my movie, to give a little inkling into my pitch, Johnny is not that. Johnny is a clout chaser. And I want Daryl Sabara as Johnny Storm. Daryl Sabara of Spy Kids fame. He was in, here it is again, The Polar Express, amongst other Robert Zemeckis films. And I just like the idea of Daryl Sabara being Johnny Storm in my version of this movie, because no diss to Daryl Sabara, but he's not the typical Hollywood leading man. When people think of, oh, who's the most attractive man in Hollywood? Daryl Sabara's name does not come up, but we will change that after my movie comes out. So Daryl Sabara, Johnny Storm, I'm 100% rocking with it. And I'll explain when the actual pitch happens. And my Ben Grimm, finally talking about some diversity amongst the group of the Fantastic Four. And I know I'm casting a black man to inevitably become an Orange Rock. That's my bad. I'm a part of the problem, but I love him as his character. Keegan-Michael Key is my Ben Grimm. Keegan-Michael Key was in the newest Pinocchio film, and I just love the idea of him as Ben. He doesn't need to be this imposing force, at least not yet. Amongst my cast, I need somebody who can play off of every single person there. And you're getting a guy who has a background in improv comedy, who made his name in improv comedy and sketch comedy. And you're putting him into a big Marvel project to where you need to have some type of charisma when you're a big CGI monstrosity. And I think Keegan-Michael Key can bring that, while you can alter his voice a little bit in the Thing process. But this is also the man who's voicing Toad in the Super Mario Brothers movie that's coming out next year. And I believe it's all him. His voice is doing that high of a register. Like, we can deepen it a little bit, do some little modulation with it, and boom, Ben Grimm, that's my guy. Keegan-Michael Key. If Daryl Sabara wasn't here, he would by far be my favorite casting. Victor Von Doom's the fun one, because in my movie, Dr. Doom is not the imposing presence that we all know him as, at least to begin with. But my Victor Von Doom, which I'll elaborate later, is Brad Pitt.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it all fits. Yeah, you left some teasers out there for us to kind of grasp at, so I'm excited to see the interplay. I mean, I think a lot of that's inspired casting. Lizzie Kaplan, Dylan Sabara, some names I wasn't expecting. So yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. Jack, let's hear your picks.
All right, I'm going to speed real quick through these because my pitch is much more important than the people that I've cast. But I thought about who I would love to see as members of the Fantastic Four. So for my Reed Richards, I've picked Rob Lowe, who appeared in Robert Zemeckis' film Contact. I love Rob Lowe. I think he would be such a charming older Reed Richards. I feel like Rob Lowe would have a tough time playing the smartest man alive, but could also convince you that he was somehow. His Chris Traeger is one of the most iconic characters in television, and I feel like that leadership would bleed through into Reed Richards. For my Sue Storm, I picked Leslie Mann from Welcome to Marwen. Again, an extraordinarily funny actor when she's not working with Judd Apatow. I think Leslie Mann is brilliant. I think she would bring a really good edge to Sue Storm that the character needs. For my Johnny Storm, I also picked somebody who was in 2022's Pinocchio, Luke Evans, who is also famous for playing Gaston in Beauty and the Beast, as well as Bard in the Hobbit films. I think Luke Evans is one of the most charming, handsome actors we have working today. I feel like he would be an excellent Johnny Storm. For my Ben Grimm, I'm so glad that this actor has worked with Robert Zemeckis because I want him to be Ben Grimm regardless. Stanley Tucci is my Ben Grimm / The Thing. Stanley Tucci is the ultimate character actor. And I feel like there's no better character for him to play than Ben Grimm / The Thing. And then my Victor Von Doom, completely inspired by the fact that I just watched Sonic the Hedgehog 2 recently. Jim Carrey as my Dr. Doom. He is a brilliant villain. He would be so funny. And especially with the route that I'm going with this pitch, I think it would work brilliantly. Dan, let's hear yours.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat as Jack. The pitch is way more important than the cast, and for very clear reasons. So to go through why I picked him, hopefully is just more evident in the pitch. So for my Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards, I've cast the common collaborator with Robert Zemeckis, Tom Hanks. I feel like Tom Hanks is your everyday man. He's played everything. Why not make him Mr. Fantastic in this movie? Because, he's kind of the Mr. Fantastic of actors in some ways. For Sue Storm, I have cast an actress who was in 2018's Welcome to Marwen, Janelle Monáe. For Johnny Storm, I have cast another actor who was in Welcome to Marwen, Steve Carell. For Ben Grimm, I'm going with a maybe a little lesser known film that Robert Zemeckis directed, another 2000 film, What Lies Beneath, and that is the amazing James Remar. Jack, I don't know if you recall, when we did the general debate during the trivia round.
Hollywood's James Remar?
Hollywood's James Remar. That was the answer to the sudden death question that neither of us got. For those of you who don't know who James Remar is, he was the replacement for the character Raiden in Mortal Kombat Annihilation. If you don't know who that is, I can't help you anymore. And then finally, for my Dr. Doom, I have cast another actor who's been in multiple Robert Zemeckis films, 2 of which we talked about today, plus 2 sequels to films we have talked about today, and that is the amazing Christopher Lloyd as Dr. Doom. So with that said, I don't want to go further because you'll see how this all plays out in my pitch.
That is an excellent cast, Ted. I'm very excited to see what our pitch is, and reading it back now, I wonder how similar our pitches are going to be. But with our films cast, it is time to pitch our Robert Zemeckis helmed Fantastic Four films.
So before we get into those pitches, I have 2 questions. First, are your films origin films?
Upon further thought, yes, my film is totally an origin film, yes.
Mine is not.
Mine isn't either. Secondly, are your films part of the MCU in any way, shape, or form?
Yes.
Sort of.
Mine is absolutely not. This is the furthest film from the MCU that I have pitched so far. With that, Chris, as our guest, like always, you get first shot.
All right, so this is difficult because I was combating the Marvel fanboy in me while also just trying to make a good movie at the same time. So this movie takes place in 2014. The beginning of the film does. Reed Richards and Sue Storm are called in. They're already established scientists in their respective fields, both of them. So we see Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Sue Storm walk into this really low-key, seedy building, but it's a front for what S.H.I.E.L.D. is operating in at the time. Because S.H.I.E.L.D., while public, they want to keep things under wraps at the same time. Sue and Reed are brought in because they are coming into this thing with little to no idea of what they are being tasked to do. They just know it's a big project and it could lead to certain things that'll change the entire universe, really. With what I am talking about is the negative zone. That's something that has been real Fantastic Four staple for a while, something I'd been asking for, but the S.H.I.E.L.D. scientists, they discovered this, and they don't know what to do about it. And especially with all these gods and these superheroes running around, they want to have a leg up on what is going on in the present universe. So Reed and Sue are there, and they're very uncomfortable with what's going on. So Reed would feel way more comfortable in this situation if he has his supposed muscle in Keegan-Michael Key's Ben Grimm. Now, for those who see Keegan-Michael Key, he's not the biggest guy on the planet. And in my movie, he doesn't start off that way. He's really just the Rock. Reed, Sue, and Ben come into the situation where they are in this weird spot with what is going on here and why does this need to be so urgent? Why do you need us to do this so quickly and figure this out? Because these shield scientists, they're throwing things into this negative zone, this portal almost, but nothing's coming out. All it is taking away, hence negative. Sue and Reed, they get working their science magic and they're trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. Well, there's a ruckus outside of this building. What is going on? Who is this? Who is trying to get into this building? Shield security comes through. Hello, Miss Storm? There's someone outside claiming to be your brother. Of course, it's Daryl Sabara's Johnny Storm. He is not a lowlife per se, but he's looking for that spark to really ignite what is the next chapter of his career, the next chapter of his life, really. And he knows that his sister and her boyfriend are these big scientists, these big shot scientists who've done all these great things, but he is not that. And he's looking to piggyback off of his sister's success. So he followed them here and he's looking to get in. And instead of shooting them on sight and saying, hey, no, I know Sue Storm, she's inside, Ben goes out to get him and to wrangle him. Because the entire time Ben's known Sue, Johnny's been a thorn in his side. They don't get along. Wow, where have we seen that before in a Fantastic Four movie? All four of our main characters are in this building. And again, this negative zone thing, what the hell's going on here? Right before the inciting event happens, we are introduced to a presence that's there. We don't really know his role in everything and why he's amongst this shield conglomerate that's there. He's a slightly de-aged Brad Pitt, and he introduces himself. My name is Victor Von Doom. He knows of Reed Richards. He's followed Reed Richards. Reed has no idea who this man is. Like, oh, that's great. I have bigger things to worry about, like what the hell I've been brought here for, but it's nice to meet you. Ben gets a bad vibe from this guy. So does Johnny. And Sue's just like, what's he want with Reed? What's the problem here? So right when they're trying to figure this thing out, all of a sudden, you hear shots go off in the background. And everyone's just stunned, standing there. This coincides with Hydra's reawakening in Captain America Winter Soldier. It's that big inciting event that the crux of that movie is based on. And we see the fallout affect the Fantastic Four, who are soon to be the Fantastic Four. Shots are firing out. Agents are turning on each other. And we see people almost trying to like duck and cover. But Reed is so sad. He's like, I figured this out. And Ben is begging Reed to get out of the situation. Because that's his friend. That's his best friend. They've been friends for years. Then we see Victor just start to toy with what's going on. Reed takes notice. He rushes back. So does Ben. So does Sue. So does Johnny. And right when shit hits the fan, Victor gets the hell out of Dodge, sabotages this work that S.H.I.E.L.D. brought these four people, I guess now, and they are sucked into the negative zone. Victor gets out of Dodge. He escapes unscathed. He did exactly what he wanted to do. Eliminate Reed Richards at all costs. He leaves. Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D., they do what they do. Now we skip ahead 10 years later. It's 2024. Thanos happens. Everything in the Infinity Saga happens, and it's awesome. It's great. We love it. But we see these two young scientists piggybacking off of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. It's Cassie Lang and this weird genius, this boy almost. But he's late to everything. That's his one flaw. He always has something going on, it feels like. It's Peter Parker. No one knows he's Spider-Man because of the events of Spider-Man No Way Home. They are tasked at this science division at MIT, and a box of files knocks over. And what's this one little thing right here? It's this accident that went just undetected. And there were casualties there. Multiple people went missing. The Forgotten. because who the hell knows what happened there? But there's almost planted files of this mysterious entity, this force. Peter, hesitant, while Cassie, no, let's try to figure this out. With the two minds that they have, they open up this zone, and the 4 people that were sucked in are spit out, all in the clothes that they left in. But there are certain differences and changes that happen to their bodies. And that's when they get their respective powers. Reed can move it to every limb of his body to his will. Sue her invisibility is similar to how we've seen it in previous films. Johnny, on fire. Ben is this big rock monstrosity. This is essentially the origin of the Fantastic Four. They get their powers within a negative zone, as we see quickly in their short time there. They were in the negative zone for 10 hours, but the negative zone works differently than how it does in real time. 10 hours in a negative zone equates to 10 years in reality. The rest of the film essentially is them navigating their new powers, how much time have they missed, where have they gone, and how they are going about their new lives. The main villain of my film is Mole Man. It's not Victor Von Doom. And as a little Easter egg for all the Robert Zemeckis fans, Charles Fleischer voices Mole Man. And in my universe, Mole Man's a mutant. He has a mutation. That's why he has this mole-like physique. Only reason why he looks the way he does is because he was experimented on by Victor Von Doom, who also in my movie has a mutation, but they just got similar to the X-Men. Some people are more fortunate than others. Mole Man looks like a mole, while Victor Von Doom's mutation is electromagnetism. And we see, the Fantastic Four assimilating to a new environment, fighting off against someone like Mole Man. Again, super weird, but the Fantastic Four are weird. And we need to establish not only this comedy that the MCU brings into its films, it's essentially the same thing in all of them. You'll see more of that in this. But the crux of my pitch, again, is not only you establish the Fantastic Four, you establish these 5 new characters that you will see going into future installments of Marvel films, but the end of the film is them gaining their name. We see them in all their costume glory. It's awesome. It's great. We have a new team of superheroes because the Avengers aren't around. They exist, but we haven't seen a superhero team since Thanos. Now we have a new one, and New York loves them, and they're great. And maybe we see Spider-Man, who knows? But the end credit scenes are where the end of the film really gets that Marvel kick to me. The first one, mid-credit scene. Reed, he's in his lab, and he's catching up on the events that he missed. Who are these heroes? Who are these villains? Who's Thanos? What is going on here? He's writing a bunch of things down, but also taking mental notes of who these people are. A portal opens up behind him. Kang walks up, this big, menacing blue figure. Dr. Reed Richards, we meet again. Reed says, "Do I know you, sir?" Kang says, "We've met in many different universes, but I need your help. I need you to help save your universe." And Reed's sitting there like, what? What do you mean save the universe? He's like, "What's your name?" "My name is Kang." Cut the black. The end credit scene of my film, the very, very last thing you see from the first Fantastic Four film, is essentially the same exact exchange. You take out Reed Richards, you put in Victor Von Doom, and instead of Kang, the regular Kang, you see a different variation of Kang. He steps out, and Victor, again, "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing in my lab?" "My name is Kang, and I need your help to destroy your universe. I am here to conquer your universe, and you're the right man to help me do that. What's in it for me? Let me show you. What's your name?" "Kang. Kang the Conqueror." Cut the black. Fantastic Four and Victor Von Doom will return.
Hell yeah.
Excellent. So good. Very MCU.
And that's what I was going to say.
Goal.
This is probably the best pitch that integrated the MCU. It wasn't like,
Yes.
oh yeah, this could be like, a variant universe, or this could here's the origin, and you might get a cameo here and there. This full-fledged dove into the events of the MCU, and I loved it.
And I know there's a lot of middle And yeah, you bring in a villain like Mole Man just to get the characters introduced. You bring them into this new universe, and they're really just getting integrated back and reintroduced. We've seen them before on film, but it's not the same as the Tim Story films. It's not the same as Josh Trank's movie. This is the Fantastic Four within the MCU, and you bring in that right style of comedy, and it's going to be a lot of course, like CGI messes. But the big crux of the film is introducing these characters while also establishing how important they are for films like Kang Dynasty, for how important they are for films like Secret Wars. They're very pivotal. And Kang being a direct descendant of Reed, we have to establish that connection off rip. And to me, you do it in the end credit scenes. You don't do it in the film.
No, I think that was a great pitch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jack, you have a lot to live up to now with your pitch.
Yeah, I do.
I know you're excited about it, but let's not wait any longer.
I told Dan I think this is my favorite pitch that I've written, but now I have to follow that. So I'm just going to tell you the title of my film right now, and then we'll go into it. This is Who Framed the Fantastic Four. We open on an action sequence of cosmic proportions. The Fantastic Four are in the middle of their greatest battle yet, fighting against the Silver Surfer. With their backs against the wall, Johnny realizes that everything is up to him. He runs at the Silver Surfer and shouts, "Flame on," as he stays the way he is. Cut, a voice yells from off camera, and suddenly all the backgrounds turn back to blue screens. A super at the bottom of the screen, Pinewood Studios, Atlanta, Georgia. From behind the camera, Steven Spielberg steps out onto the soundstage, silent. He looks at Johnny for a beat and finally says, "I thought you said you could do it practically." "I can," Johnny assures him. He attempts to flame on again, but to no avail. "You know what?" Spielberg says. "I don't have time for this. You know I got offered to make the bigger, friendlier giant. And not just that, I was told I could get a blank check to make the Fablemans 2 still fabling. And I turned that down for this. Look who made the wrong career choices." Spielberg walks off the set in anger, yelling, "Hire someone else, Kevin." We then see Kevin, the robot from She-Hulk, come down from the rafters and look directly at Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben. "Look at you," Kevin says to the Fantastic Four. "What happened to you? You were Marvel's first family, and now you can't even get a movie together. Tell Variety we're parting ways with Steven over creative differences, and that we need to take some time to retool the script. And call Dan Harmon. We need a new batch of Rick and Morty writers, stat. You four are dismissed." Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben walk off the set, dejected. "Nice going, hotshot," Ben says to Johnny. "Hey, at least I didn't forget my one line," Johnny retorts. "It's clobbering time. How do you miss that? It's like your whole thing." "Guys," Reed finally interjects, annoyed, "don't worry about it. This happens. Kevin will find us a new director and we'll be back in a couple months. The release schedule won't change, not after Comic-Con." The four walk towards a tunnel that leads to an elevator. Reed pushes a button, the four step inside, and as they ride, an elevator music version of the Marvel fanfare plays. They get off at a stop labeled Phase 6, where all the characters that have appeared in the MCU from Phases 1 through 6 reside. Any superhero, important comic character, you name it, they're here. "How'd it go, fan fucksticks?" Deadpool yells from his window. "That's your one, Wade," Ben yells back. "PG-13 from here on out." "Or what?" Deadpool taunts him. "Is Papa Kevin gonna come up here and spank me? I'd hate for him to do that, especially when my ass looks so good in this outfit." "Ignore him," Sue mutters to Ben. "He's still mad they had to bring in a gimmick to get people to see his third movie." They eventually make it back to their house and sit down, ready to put this day behind him. Eventually, just Reed and Sue are awake. "Do you really think we'll be back in a few months, Reed?" "Yeah, of course we will. Look at us. They can't make the MCU without us." "But what about..." Sue looks around and whispers, "What about the other teams?" "We don't have to worry about them. We're under new control now. Like I said, Sue, 4 months." Smash cut to 4 months later, where the Marvel Comic-Con panel is happening. Kevin Feige, now in human form, is announcing the lineup of what the future of the MCU is going to be. "And now," Feige says, "the reveal that you all have been waiting for. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very excited to announce that joining our universe in Phase 6, we've been working on it for a while. I know you're all ready. Please welcome the Justice League." We see that the Fantastic Four are sitting at home watching the panel in anger. The characters from the DCEU join Feige on stage. "We have struck a deal with Warner Brothers, and the Justice League will be appearing in the ultimate crossover film, Avengers: Justice Approaches." The panel ends with no new news about the upcoming Fantastic Four film, causing the four to go into a drunken spiral. Who cares at this point? Reed shouts at the rest of them. Take another shot. They start wandering the streets of Phase 6, eventually passing out on the sidewalk. When they wake up, they find themselves in jail. Unsure of what's happened, they are greeted by Kevin the robot, who informs them that the four were arrested the night before. For what? Sue demands to know. Tony Stark was a notorious drunk and you made it into a joke. That is not why, Kevin tells her. The four of you have been arrested for the murder of the Justice League. What? Reed says. We never even saw the Justice League. I mean, we knew they were coming to live in Phase 6, but I don't... Ben, did you see them last night? I honestly don't remember, Ben says. I thought I saw someone who shot lasers out of his eyes, but I could have sworn it was Icarus. Perhaps you should follow me, Kevin tells them. He leads them to a crime scene where the members of the Justice League are all in fact dead. All of their deaths appear to, in some way, be plausibly done by a member of the Fantastic Four. Judge Victor Von Doom is currently investigating, Kevin tells them. Wherever he decides the best course of action will be for the studio is what will go. Von Doom turns around at the mention of his name, looking at the Fantastic Four. So these are the culprits, eh, Kevin? Von Doom says. He looks them all up and down, then scoffs. The Fantastic Four. Couldn't share the spotlight, could you? No, it didn't matter that there was a plan in place, that every movie, TV show, even a comic or two helped build the world. Just had to clobber your way in. What do you recommend as a course of action? Kevin asks Von Doom. Well, it's tricky. You just made the announcement yesterday. Tell the public that negotiations fell through. Warner Brothers got greedy, and you hope that this can be reconciled in the future. And as for the culprits, Von Doom breaks into a smile. Jail isn't good enough for them. It implies they'll be set free. Send them to hell. Hell? Reed exclaims. Suddenly the four are dragged away. No, you can't do this to us. Do you know what happens to MCU characters down there? Oh, do I ever? Von Doom gleefully taunts. Don't worry. Maybe people will see you later. On ABC. The four are shoved into the elevator and shot down past all the phases, going deeper and deeper and deeper until they finally reach development hell. What is this place? Johnny asks. Something runs by. What was that? Reed exclaims. An inhuman, Ben replies. Don't look any of them in the eyes. Guys, we can't stay here, Sue says. We didn't do that to the Justice League. I know we didn't. How do we prove it then, Sue? Johnny asks. Well, first, we have to get out of development hell. But after that, I think there's only one way. We have to cross over into DC land. DC land? Ben says. No, absolutely not. Do you know what happens to people when they go into DC land? They don't come out. There are so many different attractions there. The second you step into any of them, you'll get lost. I know, Sue says. I'm well aware of the risk, Ben, but we have to try. Do you want to be stuck in development hell forever? Wait a minute, Reed says. I think I remember reading something about this place. If I remember correctly, there's a bridge connecting our branch of development hell with DC lands. The four trek through development hell, coming across a plethora of Marvel characters, but they finally find the bridge and cross over into DC land's development hell. Wow, Reed says. This is much bigger than ours. Come on, we don't have that much time, Sue says. Back in Phase 6, Von Doom speaks with Kevin about potential ways for him to be incorporated without the Fantastic Four. Maybe we do some teases with me, Von Doom says. Like a post-credit scene or something. An alert that lets the audience know I'm here, maybe they are too, but without overplaying our hand. That sounds great, Kevin says. Be sure to leak it to the press as an anonymous Twitter user. Already on it, Von Doom says, pulling on his phone. Will you excuse me, Kevin? I must be going. He goes to his new home, which was the old home of the Fantastic Four. He draws the blinds and says, it's safe now. 8 figures appear, but we don't see who they are yet. Back in development hell, the four are attempting to get to a new level of DC land, but cannot decide which is the right floor to go to. There's Snyderverse, then there's DCEU, there's DCU, but then there's Batman and Joker on separate floors. I thought they were like a hero and villain combo. Can I help you? A voice asks. The four turn around and see Superman. Wait, Johnny says, you're down here too? Yes, Superman replies. But aren't you up there too? You've had movies. Well, it's complicated, Superman says. You see, every DC character lives here. At least the original versions of ourselves do. The way it works in DC land is that when the studio decides to make something, they take whoever the subject is out of development hell, and they get cloned. The clone is then taken to whichever floor the executives so desire they be on. And if there's not a floor already, they just build a new one. Why not? So then all the original members of the Justice League, you're still down here, Reed asks. Superman nods and Reed thinks for a moment. We need you to come with us. Where to? Superman asks. You'll see, Reed replies. Back on phase 6, Kevin is making calls with Von Doom advising him. Listen, it's great to have a worthy competitor, but we've got a lot of really wonderful stuff coming out in the next few months, Kevin says into the phone. The door suddenly breaks open and the Fantastic Four stand in the doorway, the Justice League behind them. Von Doom gets up, angry. How? He screams. It seems you know a little bit more about DC characters than you do, Von Doom, Ben says. Kevin, were you aware that no matter how hard one tries, DC characters can't be killed? Because it seems Mr. Von Doom here was not. Victor, what is this? Kevin asks. Von Doom smiles and starts pacing. You know what the biggest lie when it comes to Marvel is, Kevin? That if you just make something good, the sins of the past will be forgotten. Your Fantastic Four, this super team, the first family. But you're not the first family, are you? Not the first family. Come on out, gang. The roof is ripped off of the building suddenly and 8 figures appear. 2 versions of Reed, Sue's, Johnny's, and Ben's come down. The other iterations of the Fantastic Four from the Tim Story movies and the Josh Trank sequence of scenes that technically qualifies as a movie. A fight breaks out with the MCU Fantastic Four and the Justice League fighting against the other Fantastic Fours and Doctor Doom. The Fantastic Four realize they can't take out the other versions of themselves because their power sets are matched. So the Justice League take over fighting them, resulting in massive deaths. All the members of the other Fantastic Four die, as well as the Justice League. Reed goes to comfort Superman, but as Superman dies, he says, "Don't worry, I died before. I'll be back." It's finally the Fantastic Four versus Doctor Doom. But before the fight can actually begin, Kevin stops them and says, "Let's move this somewhere else." Suddenly, the 5 are transported to Pinewood Studios on the blue screen soundstage again. "Okay, go ahead," Kevin says. The fight goes forward, and with their backs against the wall, Johnny realizes that everything is up to him. He runs at Dr. Doom and shouts, "Flame on," finally turning the heat on. They defeat Doom on the soundstage, which Kevin says was successfully recorded. "I think this will be a great film," Kevin says. But that was just a fight scene. How do we build a movie around it? Reed asks. "Leave that to me," Kevin says. We cut to the blue carpet premiere where the Fantastic Four are being interviewed about the film. "You know, it was a real process to make, but I'm really happy with how it turned out," Reed says. "Steven was a real delight to work with after everything that was sorted out. It was an honor to finally be brought into this incredible universe." Feige, back in human form, talks about how excited he is to see where the Fantastic Four go from here. You know, there's a phase 7 in the very near future. We're very excited to see these characters continue their journey. The Four sit down with their movie alongside new copies of the Justice League. And as the Fantastic Four's film begins, our movie ends. Who framed the Fantastic Four?
I tragically misunderstood the assignment. Tragically. That was incredible.
You see what I have to deal with week in and week out, Chris. Week in and week out.
That was my jaw hit the ground multiple times.
I will say I'm proud of myself. I got the twist. When you had some foreshadowing that I picked up when you said, "What about the other teams?" That is where my mind went. So I'm very proud of myself for getting the twist, though I didn't see the Justice League clone twist coming. So I wasn't fully.
Look, DC's just got a lot of characters that they want to use in a lot of universes. It's great.
But I made the mistake of making my movie in the MCU.
Chris, don't be disparaged. Your pitch was great.
Your pitch was amazing.
Look,
Jack just like sucker punching people with pitches. And I think your version of hell is worse than mine in the last episode, the Tim Burton one. That might be a worse version.
Hell. You did great, Chris.
But I am eager to see Dan.
Yeah, let's hear yours, Dan. Let's hear it. Come on.
Okay. Well, Chris, you're probably going to hate mine from the offset because my film is called To the Fantastic. You might get it in a bit. We open on the music video of the 1980s song Take On Me. You know the one. It has the woman sitting alone reading a comic book. She becomes attracted to the drawing of an attractive guy and suddenly gets pulled into the book. And after some silent flirting as the song plays, they are chased around a maze by 2 race car drivers wanting to beat them up with pipe wrenches, as one does. Anyway, as the video plays, we slowly pull back to see the video is on a laptop in what appears to be a laboratory. We pan to a funny caricature drawing of Doc Brown on the wall as we hear banging and hissing. We turn further to see a man in a white lab coat hunched over, mumbling. Suddenly, the man lurches up and says, "Ah, man, Doc, I think I finally figured it out." The man in the coat is Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox. He has taken up the science mantle from his friend and mentor, Doc Brown. Over Marty's shoulder is a picture of him and Doc Brown together, the tenor of the moment indicating that Doc Brown has passed away. Now, if you take a closer look, you will see he is working on some large machine. It appears to be a large box with a heavy door on it. After taking a moment in exhausted admiration of his creation, Marty goes to the phone and calls someone. Wilson, it's your dad. Can you come over? I have something to show you. We switch to a scene of a suburban household. Inside, we see a man, played by Haley Joel Osment. He hangs up the phone. That was my dad. He wants to show me something, Will says to his wife, Claire, who is entering the room. His wife is played by Merritt Weaver. As the scene continues, the exposition shares with the audience that the relationship between Will and Marty has been strained due to Marty's work. Will and Claire have a son named Emmett, named after his Uncle Brown, and he is played by Llewyn Lloyd from Pinocchio. Finally, we learn that Will and Claire are dealing with some financial struggles. The conversation concludes with Will deciding to sell his rare Fantastic Four comic books that his father gave to him. He was hoping to pass them down to his son. Claire tries to protest, knowing what they mean to him, but Will is insistent that it is not as important as getting his family out of their money problems. With the comic books in tow, Will, on his way to sell the comic books, pauses and takes a detour to his father's lab. When Will arrives, Marty is thrilled to see him, but Will maintains a reserved, even uncomfortable posture. What is this new thing you want to show me? Will asks. Right to the point, I guess, Marty says, sensing his son's trepidation. Oh, good, you brought some comic books, Marty says, tossing a different one aside. I'm so glad you kept these. Before Will could protest, Marty takes them and places them inside a slot inside the machine. Dad, be careful with that. Marty, too focused, pulls Will to the door. I wanted you to be the first person to try this when you were a kid, but I could never get it quite right. And while I still want you to be the first person to try, I'm now hoping you can bring Emmett over sometime to try it out. Here, we go into some more exposition where the two discuss their troubled history. And while nothing is resolved between the two of them, Will realizes that the only way to get the comics back is to appease his father. Fine, Dad, what is this? This will make virtual reality feel like an old tube TV. It takes the stories from your comic books and make them come to life. Here, take this. Marty hands Will a wrist cuff, some sort of piece of technology. This is what you will use to get out of the simulation. Will cautiously takes it and puts it on. Now step in, Marty says excitedly. Aren't you coming too? Will questions. I can't. I have to operate it from here to make sure you make it back all right. And besides, there's only room for one person right now. Before Will could protest again, Marty shoves him in and closes the door. Sitting in the dark, Will hears some creaking and banging. Then after a moment of silence, he is thrust into a cavalcade of color. But upon coming to his senses, Will finds himself in an animated world and is able to walk around as if it were his normal surroundings. Then suddenly, an eruption. He then goes to hide behind some rubble, and he witnesses firsthand the Fantastic Four taking on Mole Man's monsters, Mole Man here being played by Crispin Glover. This is reminiscent of Fantastic Four #1, the original Fantastic Four comic book. The battle is intense, but the Fantastic Four prevail. However, once the fighting is done, the scene continues, and Will soon realizes that the Fantastic Four start heading his way. Hello there, Reed Richards, or Mr. Fantastic calls to him. Are you all right? Will starts freaking out and just starts pressing all the buttons on the cuff. As he presses the buttons, the scenes start changing. He sees different scenes from different comic books, different frames that he remembers reading as a kid. However, the incessant button pressing puts a strain on the cuff. It shorts out and falls off in one of the transitions from scene to scene. When Will finally stops, it is in the middle of the scene from Fantastic Four Annual, Volume 1, Number 6. In this one, Reed, Ben, and Johnny are trying to steal the cosmic control rod from Annihilus, who is going to be voiced by Meryl Streep, because why the hell not? For those who don't know, Annihilus is this insectoid creature who kind of holds domain over the negative zone and uses this thing called the cosmic control rod to give, well, in this case, her immortality. And she is a nihilist, obsessed with extending her own lifespan and will destroy anything in her way to maintain that. So, going back to the film, the three of them are trying to steal the cosmic control rod because it is needed to save Sue and Reed's future child, Franklin, during childbirth. Franklin's about to be born, but due to the cosmic radiation and Sue's body chemistry from her powers, Franklin's birth is at risk. So they need this cosmic control rod to bring it back to help negate those adverse effects. Through the chaos, there's no time to stand still. So Will is trying his best to keep up with the Fantastic Four. But he soon realizes that he's being talked to. Hey, you, yes, you, will you stop doing that? Johnny yells to Will. It's very disorienting when you keep changing things. Will doesn't respond. Ah, man, kid is shook, Ben says. Don't worry about it. We'll help you, Reed says to Will. The scene from the comic plays out to the point where the four of them are stuck on a floating rock in the negative zone, just trying to make their final escape from Annihilus. During this time, there's even more exposition. Will shares how he got there and that he's now stuck there because he lost the wrist cuff. Reed, Ben, and Johnny share stories about their lives, all of which Will knows because he read all the comic books. So he's kind of telling these stories with them as they're going. And that they're kind of confused, but they're enjoying it nonetheless. Then they get on the subject of fatherhood. Reed shares why he works so hard at his science and work to make the sacrifices he does, and it's all for his child. Through this conversation, Will starts getting a better understanding of his father, Marty, and the struggles he has gone through, and that he's really trying his best for him. Eventually, the rest of the comic plays out, they escape Annihilus, and they make it back to Sue. Reed uses part of the cosmic control rod to ensure that the birth of Franklin goes without issue, and that he and Sue are safe. After some time, Sue is rested. Will is able to have a conversation with her, where we learn that Will's mother died when Will was very young. We don't hear why. That's not so important to the story, but that it was really Will and Marty through most of Will's childhood. And his father and him never took time to process that together. And that's where a lot of their struggle came from, is that they did it on their own. Eventually, Reed returns to the room, apologizing to his wife for stepping away for so long. But in his hand is an animated replica of the cuff. Will was able to describe it enough that Reed used his big comic book brain to replicate it. And he gives it to Will. Here, this is your way back. Sue's like, Reed, I can't be mad at you for wanting to help people, but I will be mad if you don't pick up and hold your son now. Reed extends and stretches out his arms, takes his son and holds him close, and he's beaming with pride. He looks to Will. You best be getting back now. As Will gets ready to activate the device, Reed says, Wilson, I'm sure he's sorry. Then with a flash, Will is back in the chamber, and as Marty opens the door, Will rushes to give him a big hug. And while much more has to be said, a lot of healing was done in that time. Thanks, Dad, Will whispers. Marty does not respond right away, but he does give a small smile. We cut to a few days later. Marty takes Will and his family to a different part of the lab where a safe was kept. I wish you would have told me you were having money issues, son. There are perks to going on so many adventures with your Uncle Brown. In the safe were all sorts of treasures. Gold bars, jewels, lots of things that in between the third Back to the Future and now, adventures that he and Doc Brown went on that, got some perks. These were all going to be yours anyway once I was gone. But, you need it now, so here you go. The movie ends with Will, Claire, and Emmett just staring slack-jawed, looking into the safe. However, we do have a mid-credits scene. Back in the comic world, we get a close-up shot of the lost cuff. After a beat, a metal gauntlet reaches down and picks it up. Panning up, we see the face of Dr. Doom with the only thing he says being, "What do we have here?" And the movie cuts to black.
Well
I
done,
am
Dan.
in love with both of your films so much. Oh my God, for two drastically different reasons. That was so sweet, Dan.
Thank you.
It was a very emotional pitch.
Oh my God.
So
See, and now I feel bad for talking shit about a fourth Back to the Future.
No, that's fine. No, this movie isn't happening. So this specific one isn't happening. So you don't have to worry about that.
Well, now I want it to happen. That was when you were
That's the power of a pitch, Dan.
Yo, and when you were talking about the exchange of Reed and Will and how they talk about fatherhood, and I could just hear Tom Hanks as Reed Richards giving that. Oh my God, it's so cool. That was so good.
I appreciate it. I see a lot of parallels, at least in the story, between Reed Richards as a scientist and, in this case, Marty as a scientist, and just how you can get consumed by it. And that's Reed Richards. So I wanted there to be those parallels. And Jack, you weren't entirely wrong. We both took Zemeckis films and played off of them, though.
Yeah, but
different.
we played off of different Zemeckis films.
I was trying my darndest to somehow, I still went with Christopher Lloyd as Doom.
Which was why I thought I was going to go with the Judge Doom route. I
was trying my hardest to parallel that as it was Judge Doom, or a variant Judge Doom was Doctor Doom. But I decided that was just a stretch, so I just went with him being cast as the voice of animated Doctor Doom in this.
Exactly.
That's so sick. I love that. Jax was batshit insane.
That's how I operate. I am batshit
week
insane.
After week.
That was wild, and I loved it. And then Dan's, you're just so sweet. So,
thank you.
It was so cute. And I'm
See,
over here like,
that's the dichotomy of what Dan and I do. It's like Dan will have like the more emotional actual film.
Thank
and
you.
I was over here thinking to myself, like, I would watch the hell out of both of these, and then
I
my
would
movie's over here,
watch
explosion,
Every
boom, boom,
movie
boom.
here. I would watch all three of these
Like,
movies.
We've seen Zemeckis do like the animated world, like cartoons come into play. We've seen him do like action figures come to life with Marwen. I wanted to play off of like, what if comic books came to life, essentially? So kind of the next progression of childhood coming to life, like I said, with Sunday cartoons, action figures, and now comic books. So I thought that was also a natural progression with other themes and stories we've gotten from Zemeckis.
Yeah,
Loved
100%.
I love both of those. And the one thing, go back retroactively and add one thing to my pitch. The movie ends MF Doom song, because that was the one thing the Fantastic Four movies in the past dropped the ball on. Rest in peace, MF Doom, but we need MF Doom in a Fantastic Four movie at some point.
I could not agree more.
100%. But, I think we all did a fantastic job. With our castings, our pitches for a Robert Zemeckis Fantastic Four film. And I hope you, the listeners, enjoyed our exploration into these what-if scenarios. We want to make a special note that the Fantastic Four podcast is hosted for free on Anchor. We encourage you, if you have your own podcast idea, to check out Anchor. It really is a great resource for getting your idea off the ground. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
If you are listening on YouTube, we would greatly appreciate you hitting the subscribe button and commenting with who your Robert Zemeckis cast would be, on what you thought of our lists and pitches, and on which director you'd want to see next.
I want to thank Matt Hart and Maddie Gunner for the fantastic theme music they created for us. And I certainly want to thank you, Chris, for being our guest today. I hope you had fun. Now, please tell our listeners where else they can find you.
Now, first off, I am eternally grateful for the invite. This was so much fun. Y'all's pitches were extraordinary. But people can find me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at the letter C, Anthony Lopez. You can follow me on Instagram at the letter C _, Anthony Lopez. And you can currently check me every so often on the Flick N Reel YouTube channel, FLICK-N, the letter N -REEL. Find me on there every so often, but just follow me on Twitter. I share everything I do. Jack, Dan, y'all are super rad. Y'all are fantastic.
Well, I'd be remiss to say, Chris, how you and I met in person. Like, we had done some content, the content online every now and then, some movie reviews, some MCU discussions, some Disney Plus show discussions, but like just out of happenstance, both of us were interested in seeing the musical 6 in Chicago. And I don't know if you said like, I'd go, and I'm like, well, I'd go. So we ended up getting tickets. You and I, first time meeting in person, I drove out to Chicago and we saw 6 together. It was awesome. It was a great show. If you haven't seen it, we are very pro musical on the Fancast.
We're very pro musical here on the Fantastic Four podcast.
So that's why I felt inclined to share that is how we met in person, was seeing 6.
Yeah, and I talk about, I love 6, and you were the only reason I went to go see it. I wanted to see it, but there was no one in my immediate circle that wanted to go see it. And then you're like, I'll go with you. And I said, yes, thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. And I'm eternally grateful for you. But this is super rad, and hopefully it won't be the last musical we check out, Dan.
For sure. Anyway, that is our show. Thank you all so much for listening. I am Dan Bettenhausen.
I'm Jack Mayer.
And on behalf of our guest, Chris Anthony Lopez, we hope you all have a fantastic day.